Welcome to this episode of It's Not You, but Sometimes It Is, the podcast where real C-suite leaders talk about the real crap they've faced. And this episode, such a joy. I got to talk with Karyn Martin, the CEO and president of Enterprise Design. And she was a very great example of getting in your own way when it is you and being very clear about that and her authenticity and the wisdom she gained around being a female executive and how imposter syndrome got in her way. And also just having a lot of wisdom to share about still being able to be a feminine in a CEO role and come with a feminine leadership style. So incredible conversation. I know you'll enjoy it. Welcome to the episode. All right, welcome to this episode of It's Not You, but Sometimes It Is. And we have real talk with real C-suite leaders about the real crap we've faced and what we've taken from it. And I am so excited to have Karyn Martin here with me today. Karyn is the president and CEO of Enterprise Design. And I will let you, Karyn, introduce your company, what y'all do, and you've had a really interesting journey to get there and really like worked your way up. So give us a bit of that backdrop as well.
Okay, will do. Well, Enterprise, we're a commercial interior design firm here in Dallas, and we were established in July of 1981. By our founder, Catherine Berg, and she ran the company up until kind of off and on near the end, but really up until about 2018.
Mhm.
And so that's when I took over as president, but I've been with the company since I joined in uh, June of 1998.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been here for a while. When I joined the company, you could not have told me that I would be here this long. And definitely, if you had told me that I would be president, I would have thought you needed your head examined, that there was something really wrong with you. But it was just over time. I started off in the human resources side, where we're dealing with people, which now I see was key. It absolutely was key and pivotal to me being able to take this role. I think had I not understood the people, I couldn't have understood the company. And so I worked when I started here, I was as the director of HR and corporate administration.
Okay.
That was the in the background, doing the HR piece, doing the people piece, and doing, that background piece of the business,
Mhm.
some of the facilities and all of those other little ankle biters that most people don't want to handle. But again, it was absolutely the training that I needed. Did not know that, couldn't have believed that I was, training to ever be at the helm. Because I remember when the time came and we had gone through some leadership evolutions that had not done well for us. And so when it came time to start to do something permanent, I was pushing other people up to the plate. They were designers, and surely a designer should run a commercial interior design firm, right? I not a designer, that is not, the genes that I was born with. And so, but they kept backing out. And then they needed someone who really understood, because some of the other leaders had to come in, didn't understand the people piece.
Mhm.
It's through no fault of their own, because you lead different companies differently. We are a service industry.
Right.
And so we had, someone come in that was said, well, you can self-select, and that treated our people like you could just go out on the street and go get another one to replace them. And you can't. They're highly trained. They have 4-year degrees, 5 years degrees, and have spent years honing their skill. And so what they do is pivotal to who the company is. And with that understanding, even the staff wanted me to step up and take the role,
Okay.
which was surprising to me. It really was. It surprised me.
Yeah.
But it was a good choice for everybody.
Right, right. So, I think we all have this fallacy that it's the technical experts that make great leaders, or, the smartest or the most dominant A-type personalities or whatever it is. And research shows that none of those things are tied to being a good leader, especially not a great CEO. Great CEOs tend to be people who are really smart with people skills and really self-aware, and you developed that the hard way and quickly, considering your career path. So it's funny, like we don't even see it in ourselves because other people don't value it, and your story really illustrates that.
Sure.
So it's an interesting path to the C-suite. The C-suite. A lot of people are founders, or they came in at a very senior role with that being their goal, and then some of us kind of stumble into it or are pushed into it.
Pushed, yes.
And I've met a lot of those people as well, but it sounds like you're someone who's willing to take on a challenge, right? And that has been consistent for you. You have done the hardest work in your career.
Sure.
So, can you give us an example of something that's really been difficult, a really hard thing that you've had to overcome in your role in a workplace, not necessarily this company? What did you have to do to overcome it? What did you learn from it?
The hardest thing I had to overcome was me. The biggest obstacles in our way is normally ourselves. And the understanding that I was absolutely the right person at the right time to take the helm. Whether anybody else thought that or the industry thought that, sometimes only time will tell and how well you step up into a role.
Mhm,
But no one can shape that for you but you.
mhm,
And so overcoming the thought process, well, I'm not a designer, and
mhm,
kind of feeling like you have to take the back seat and concede to others' opinions when that is absolutely the wrong thing to do, because being at the helm, you were put at the helm because there was something in you that was needed for that role. And embracing that in yourself is the most important thing that you can do, and trusting those instincts that you innately have.
yeah, yeah. And I think women often have more imposter syndrome than men. I hear it more from female leaders, and they have to get over some of those just stereotypes and biases, right? That we've all faced, that we've believed at some level, and we have to come up against those beliefs that are not working for us and are just not accurate or helpful. We have to do it sometimes beliefs about ourselves, but also just our beliefs about leadership in general, about how to lead a company. We've all
Yes,
accepted a lot of crazy myths from other people.
yes. And then as women, I think oftentimes we think we have to you see them either go all the way masculine,
Hmm.
or that we have to be overly nice in situations where you have to have a firm hand,
Hmm.
but you can still do that with femininity.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I've struggled with that myself, even with what you wear, how you present, and realizing that I was showing up in a more masculine way than what was natural to me. And I thought, why am I doing this? Why do I associate leader with male, right?
Correct.
And you've got to look at that with
You
yourself.
do,
Yeah.
really
Yeah,
do.
because women are sometimes going to lead differently, and that's not bad and actually can be a gift and a strength.
It absolutely is. And staying in who you authentically are
Yeah,
will only help you.
absolutely. Absolutely. No matter who you are, authenticity is incredibly integral to
It
leadership.
is.
Yeah.
It
Or you're
is.
going to be so stressed out if you're wearing all these masks, right?
Yeah,
And showing up in a way that's not authentic. That's an incredible amount of stress to always be presenting something that you're not.
it is. And I sat on a panel about a year ago, and they were talking about the exact same thing and showing up in that masculine space. And one of my things to that is leadership really is not male or female.
Mm-mm.
Leadership stands on its own.
Yeah.
And I think as women, when we realize that the skillship of leaders is not about whether you're a male or female. It's about who you are as a person.
Hmm. It's character.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And a set of skills anyone can develop and that
Correct.
create a character, right? A
Yeah.
kind of character. So, um, and frankly, I think often women are a little more attuned to culture and social interactions and how they're impacting the performance of a company.
Yes.
Um, and obviously, a lot of men are as well and get there. But frankly, like we're socially programmed as little girls to pay attention to how others around us feel and how our relationships are
That's
going.
true.
And so we do
Yeah.
that at work, right? We're programmed. I don't know
That's
if it's hardwiring, if we're born that way. I think we're probably programmed that way to a large extent.
true.
But either way, we pay attention and we're more attuned. And that's been your strength. You've been able to show up and take that and take your way to the C-suite. And so they say, that expression, culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can have the great vision and goals, and if you're not paying attention to the people side, then you're not going to get there. So can you give me an example of that where you had a great goal and really you had to create a culture and create a high performing team and you weren't there yet and it was keeping you from reaching goals?
Yes. Well, when I, took over the helm, uh, everybody in the company had been through a lot. We'd been through a
Mhm.
lot of leadership changes, and we had seen a lot of our friends and colleagues leave. We had gone from 10% attrition to 75 one year. Oh yeah, it was massive change.
Mhm.
And so I think it was having to reestablish the culture of who we really were and that culture of where the people matter,
Mhm.
that we're not a company without them, being able to reshape how they saw change. That change is necessary,
Mhm.
and how we treated each other internally.
Okay.
Because I feel like if you treat people internally terrible, or you don't have a care for who they are. They're just a number. They're somebody to utilize and throw away. It's toxic. And you're not going to get the same level of work and care for the client because
Mhm.
they're just trying to survive their day,
Mhm.
not in a place that they feel appreciated and thrive and then want the clients to have that same kind of experience. So that was one of the first things I had to do was reestablish and change some cultural things that had transpired
Mhm.
during the leadership transitions that we went through. And doing that through showing people that you care, showing people that, life is more than just work. And you cannot expect a person to show up and not have their personal life affected by work or
Mhm.
their work life affected by their personal life.
Absolutely.
And finding a culture that allows people to be human and have home life and have home life issues was really very key and very important to me, that they know, okay, look, I know that life is going to happen to you.
Yeah.
And when it does, you can feel free to come and talk. Let's talk through how do we create a system for that individual for how they get through what's happening in their life right now and still be able to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm going to say, I'm going to chalk that one up again to a feminine strength.
Yeah.
Women tend to be a little bit more focused on balancing caregiver roles and just other things that are valuable to us outside the workplace, and not trying to pretend that we're showing up at work as this person that is just a work robot, right? We
Right.
we want
Yes.
that balance.
Very true.
And so you've been through, as you said, a lot of leadership change. You've seen a lot of leaders, and some their behaviors did not generate great results. And I know a lot of how I've learned how to lead is by watching some people lead that I don't think did a great job. And I thought, I don't want to do that bad boss behavior, right?
Yes.
So, can you give us examples of traits or behaviors that you have learned, ooh, I don't want to do that, and what have you done instead?
Yes. Well, I've seen leaders who rule by tyranny.
Mm,
That they are, it's threats, fears, intimidation. Your voice doesn't matter. You do what they say, when they say, how they do it. And that absolutely crushes morale
mhm.
and crushes how people show up. And a lot of times, those types of leaders are going to miss what each person is bringing to the table.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then why did you hire them? If you're going to try to do all the work and manage everything, what's the purpose of someone else in there?
Do you think they were aware of that? That what how their behavior was impacting other people?
I don't think they care. I think that's the biggest piece. I think that's what they want. Some people, then there may be some people that are just terribly oblivious. They are.
Oh, there are.
But there, yes. But there's some people that's what they want. That's what being a boss means to them. You know, boss means you boss people around. They do what you say do. They don't question you. They don't bring anything other to the table, anything else to the table other than what you want them to.
Mhm.
And so that's what is control. They
Yeah,
feel like that they're keeping control of the company that way.
yeah. It's that need for control that makes us do incredibly dysfunctional things as leaders. Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. Uh,
So
okay.
yeah. So, you have led this company through a lot of change, but I'm also sure, in your past, you have developed high-performing teams and faced challenge in doing that. That's sometimes surprising, right? Like, wait, what? This is coming up? Can you give us an example of something that you've had to overcome when creating a truly high-performing team? Not just big changes, but other kind of less expected things.
The thing that was the hardest and the most, a little bit jaw-dropping to me was when, even though people may be at the top of their field or have been in role for a while, that oftentimes there becomes a disconnect between the reality of who they are and the reality of the skills they possess versus their own perception.
Okay.
And you have to rebalance that for the team to be functional. Because you can't have someone that's just oblivious and they think that they're here, they're at the top of everything, and really, they're a few steps down.
Mhm.
And so realigning that thought process and doing it in a way that does not break trust or break that person's confidence,
Mhm.
having very targeted training
Mhm.
is key to that, to help them to start to reanalyze who they really are so they can become who they really thought they were.
That's tough. That's tough. I mean, I think we've all had to have that cringeworthy conversation where you sit down with someone and say, like, here's where you're at, but here's where you need to be. I know you think you're here, but let me describe what that actually looks like
Yes.
and that you're not there, right? That's
Yes.
that's the essence of effective coaching. And it's a hard
Yes.
conversation. And I'm a professional coach, and I still sometimes have to steel myself up for that hard talk. Um, it's going to be hard for anyone with any ounce of empathy. And it's always a little bit shocking when you realize, oh, this person, their perception is not in reality, right? That's a hard one. So, on the topic of bad bosses, that's so what you just described, when you have that trait, that mismatch with reality in a leader, that is really dangerous. When that leader, their perception of who they are, how they're leading, and their skill level is vastly different.
Yes.
And that 360 feedback can be crushing for people who have one image of how they lead and who they are and their impact on people, and then they get the reality of how they're perceived. And there's a lot of bad bosses out there who don't realize it. So, what do you think makes a bad boss? And are they fixable? Have you fixed a bad boss?
I think, again, that lack of self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and compassion for those they lead is a recipe for a bad boss. Just that's, quintessentially a bad boss. And that realignment of that, yes, I have had to get people realigned. And I find it is so important. I think sometimes we put those conversations off, or hope that they'll just get there. And I found a lot of times that's not how that's going to work out.
Mhm.
That you really do have to sit down and kind of drive that person forward.
Mhm.
But if they're not willing to listen and they're not willing to change, then that's when you really have to know it's time for you to pivot
Okay.
and find somebody different. So they are redeemable, but it really depends on their ability to change
Mhm.
and their
Absolutely.
ability to accept hard feedback. Sometimes you have to go and, as they say, lick your wounds, and that's totally acceptable, but you have to come back out and say, okay, I need to change this about me so that I can be better and become everything I want to be and to my team.
Yeah.
And so if they're self-aware and willing, yeah, they're absolutely redeemable and they're willing to do the work.
But that
Because sometimes,
willingness.
yes, it is willingness, because then you have to start to work on changing some things that may have been hard-coded in you from childhood.
Absolutely. And that, again, that's a lot of emotional intelligence is realizing some of those little quirks. I like to call them quirks because it sounds neutral and nice, but usually those like straight up dysfunctional flaws about some of
Yes,
the beliefs you have and the ways you've been, right? And emotional intelligence is figuring those things out and wanting to make those hard adjustments.
very true.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier about, the biggest thing you've had to overcome is yourself. And I think all of us have had many moments probably where we realize that we've been our own worst enemy. Um, can you share any other examples of like an old mindset, approach, or trait that you've had to overcome? And what did you really learn from that? What did you carry forward from it?
Well, one of the big things was not to become solely identified with work. That ability to step back and take care of my personal life, taking care of Karen the person, not Karen the business leader, not Karen the public image, but Karen the person
Mhm.
needed as much and sometimes more attention
Mhm.
than all of those other aspects of my life. And when I did not do that, I was my own worst enemy and didn't even realize it until I hit a wall.
Mhm.
Because burnout will come when you do that. And when you're one of those kind of tough, hardcore people that you're going to drive forward anyway, which I can be that, it tends to prolong the self-awareness that you need to stop and take care of the personal you.
Yeah. Yeah. Karen, that hits home for me. I was a CEO and had a baby, and I realized like I had this just total crisis of I don't know if I can do this. And all of a sudden I realized the most important thing to me in the world was being a mother to this baby. And I didn't know if I could do that and be a really effective CEO. And it terrified me. And I realized I too much of my identity was wrapped up in my job. And I know a lot of people will hear that and not even understand what we're saying when we say too much of your identity is wrapped up in your job, right? Um, but what I had to do is realize that the love that I had for this little child, I needed to have for myself, right? I needed to reflect that, like, if I actually loved myself like I loved him, how would I be living my life differently? And I would be taking care of myself better. What do I want for him, right? And that self-love has to come first for you to be able to give that to others.
So true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think through that sometimes I had to realize I was battling myself and not the world.
Yeah. That's a hard one when you really own it and you realize my life is up to me. It's not really about all these other things. I can't blame any other person or situation.
Right.
And I just got to look here. This is where the answers are.
Very true. Yes.
Yeah. So, give us a glimpse about where your company's headed. You are at the helm now in that scary seat, and you've been doing it for a while. You seem like you no longer have that imposter syndrome. You are comfortable and confident in this role. What's your vision for where you want to take this team, and how are you shaping the culture to get there?
Well, knowing that I will not be at the helm forever, I think is key.
Okay.
Because a lot of times that transition piece, making sure that the next generation is ready and that the marketplace is ready. Because anytime that there is a transition in power, there's a vulnerability.
Mhm.
And so you really have to shore that up. So knowing that right now I am that turnaround, that interim president, excuse me, to turn the company around, to grow it, solidify its base, all while I am, working and training the next person in line to make sure that they're ready.
Mhm.
And then my next step to that is making sure the marketplace is ready for them to take the helm
Awesome.
so that when the transition happens, the marketplace, oh, yes, we know them, that there is no disruption,
Mhm.
in the stability of the company.
Mhm.
That is really very important to me. So that really is what I'm readying for the future, is readying us for the transition that will come, because I don't want to do this always. I mean, nobody should think that they're going to do this into their 80s and 90s and that they are the one and only leadership for the company.
Yeah.
But making sure that that next generation is ready for a bigger, more robust, moving company than what we have been.
Mhm. Awesome.
And so readying for that is really what's in the future.
Okay. Awesome. So, I want to close out by asking you a kind of fun question. If you could hop into a time machine and go back and talk to you 10 to 15 years ago, what advice would you give yourself?
I think one, trust my instincts more
Okay.
and trust who I am, not spending so much time trying to justify who I am and what I'm called to do. Just owning it from day one
Mhm.
would have been 1,000 times easier than the process of, again, fighting me in all of this. And, back to protecting who I am as a person, protecting my peace, and protecting my personal life,
Mhm.
making sure that I had more separation in that,
Mhm.
so that there's always that possibility of becoming too one-dimensional.
Mhm.
And we're not meant to be that. We're multi-dimensional creatures.
Mhm.
And anytime you try to flatten it down into one thing, you start to crush other parts of who you are. So I really started to explore other things that made only me happy, that it wasn't going to benefit anybody but me, and having hobbies that just make me happy
Mhm.
has really helped.
I love it. So much wisdom there, Karyn. I can't thank you enough for the conversation. This has been a lot of fun. Lots of wisdom, lots of mic drops. You had like 20 mic drops in here. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really
Thank
appreciate it.
you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.